It should all come up soon.
I think it's quite
Right, shall we make a start? Welcome everybody. I wonder if you could just push the door to for us if you're standing by the door. Order! Yes, please, if you don't mind, John, thanks. So, welcome everybody. I'm Ian Corby from the EU Consent Project. Alistair is also here from EU Consent. And this is intended to be a sort of continuation of our conversation earlier where we sort of described a new approach to interoperable age verification to everybody in the other room. Just put your hand up if you weren't there this morning. You will not be penalised. Okay, so what I will do is just very quickly, without all the blurb about the project and how wonderful it was, and thank you to the sponsors and all the rest of it, just get down to the hardcore tech. So in our first EU consent proof of concept, which we hacked together, I think would be fair to say, in 18 months, we had a solution where if user A goes to website A, and that website is using age verification provider A, then they get access to the age restricted site. And if on the following day they went to website B using a different provider, they'd have to repeat the whole process again. So what we did in the first phase of EU consent was we said, why don't we just give the user a token or a cookie in actual fact in that case, which says to any other age verification provider on the network, you do not need to ask this user to do an age check. You can just reuse the one they did yesterday. And in order to do that, you need to go and ask age verification provider A whether that user is old enough, young enough, in the correct age range, whatever it is you wish to ask. And you get the answer, instead of going back to the user, you get the answer from age verification provider A. In some cases, the original provider might re-authenticate you. So if it's a high risk situation, they might want to just double check it's not just the case that you've got the same device. They may wish to also check that it's still you sitting at the device. And that was essentially how the first system worked. That is exactly the same as the European eIDAS system, where in version 1, which currently operates, where if you are logging in for government services in Greece, but you happen to be from Paris, you try to log into the Greek government with your French ID and it goes, you are not Greek, you are French, and you get redirected to the French infrastructure. You log into France and then France tells Greece that you are who you say you are and you can put your tax return in or whatever it is you want to do. So essentially we copied that technology, and that's how the basis of our interoperable age assurance worked in phase 1. But obviously this is going through the process here, and then magically on the second website, which was a dating website, instead of having to go through that process, you get this little worry thing, and a couple of seconds later, it's asked the first provider and you've got in. And we also did some work on parental consent as well, which I will just gloss over. But there was a lot of unfinished business from that approach, as you can imagine, and life has moved on. So in particular, if we look at clients of age verification providers, and the one that everybody would love to get is Pornhub, because obviously it's the biggest potential age verification requirement you can find. They're saying we want on-device age checks. But also from regulators, we have the French CNIL saying they want to see double-blind age checks, where it's impossible to know where the user is using their age check, and it is impossible for the adult website to know who the user is. Or the Spanish authority, who are saying, we've come up with this idea for a prototype of a age verification app on your device, which retrieves your age from your eIDAS wallet when those are available, and all the other apps and browsers on the same device can go to that app. Both of those proposals from France and Spain, we've found problematic to try and implement, particularly when you want to say, how does the commercial model work? Because a perfectly anonymous system makes it absolutely impossible to send a bill to anybody for doing an age check, because you don't know who's used it. So that was the essence of the problem. So we've been looking to say, can we apply some of those very laudable policy goals of double blind and privacy enhancing technology but do it in a way that is works for a commercial model. And so that hence we've come up with, as part of the second phase of this EU consent project, funded by Safe Online, who also fund this conference, the AgeAware app. Technically, it's an agent, not an app. I've just been asked to clarify that, but I'm going to call it an app from here on in because everybody else understands that. And so this is the big picture. So I'm going to do a sort of weatherman impression. So over here you have issuers, age verification providers, age estimation providers, who works for verification and estimation. And over here you have the websites. They might be social media platforms, they could be apps you've loaded onto your device, they could be adult websites. And sitting in the middle is the user, and they've downloaded our app or agent, or at least they will do when the whole thing's set up. And in that app are sitting a lot of tokens, and the tokens tell you essentially how old somebody is. And in order to read the tokens, they're transmitted via an anonymizing service, which strips away any data so that it's impossible for the relying party to know who that token belongs to. And equally, it's impossible for the originating issuer to know where their token is being used. So you can't track where people are going online and build up a profile of which pornographic sites are their favorite, nor can the relying parties find out, through this process at least, who their customers are. So what we have in the blue is the bit we think we have to do independently, neutrally, as a non-profit at the centre of the system. People get very jumpy about trusting for-profit organisations with something which might become quite business critical. So EU Consent, as a non-profit based in Belgium, is hopefully a good, trustworthy central organisation. So we have an oversight committee, and then it acts as a gatekeeper. So we have to make sure every issuer is doing a good quality age check to the standardised levels of assurance which are being debated by the ISO as we speak, but are touched upon in the IEEE standard as well. And so once you've been certified, you've been audited, you can join the network. And it's also the certification authority in the world of public keys and trust. So it will give the keys to the issuers so that they can sign their tokens, and we can know that it's come from a legitimate source, not somebody just creating their own token. We also then and this is the sort of the trick to make it commercial, we need a tallying service. So we need to know how often a token from any provider is used by any relying party. And imagine a world, if we just deal with pornography, there are 5 million websites, so you potentially have 5 million relying parties, and we might have 50 age verification providers. Hopefully they will all join my trade association, but you could have an awful lot of invoices being sent on that basis. So it might be helpful for these issuers to get together and create some sort of orchestration commercial scheme that is there to collect the cash and redistribute it out according to how many times it's being used. So the fees could potentially all flow through here. It's competitive as well. It's open and competitive. So we've said there might be a backstop charge of $1 a check. We don't think anybody charges more than that, except for a few ambitious American companies. But let's say it's $1 a check as the backstop. So you can use any token for $1, and we will find a way of paying whoever issued it that $1. But you might say, actually, I want to try and attract more people to use my token, so I'm going to say my token is only 40 cents. And so in the public part of the token, which is sort of a wrapper, which is visible, and then the inside is the actual age data, you can advertise your price. And we can build logic for the relying parties where they can say what price they're willing to pay. They may prefer one supplier over another, so they might have done a deal with Yoti or with Alistair's company, AgeChecked, or OneID, in fact, and they might have a preference for which company's tokens they want to use. They could, if they wish, then do that payment offline, bilaterally, so they could keep that discounted price confidential. They don't have to do everything through the orchestration scheme. But equally, I'm told this scheme can operate in a way that pricing can be kept still confidential to the individual companies. Even the people operating the scheme wouldn't necessarily know prices that are going through it. But that's all kind of for another day, because what we're really interested in is how this flow works and how it preserves anonymity and prevents tracking. Are there any other key parts of this that I've missed?
I don't know whether you want to talk about the wrapping of the token, or is that the next one?
Yeah, so we've got a sort of public side to the token and a private side. So on the public side, it says the level of assurance. It says
It's right. Sorry, so it's not.
Jump in.
Just correct that slightly. It's not so much public and private. What an issuer will create and give to the agent or app is a token which it's prepared to share with relying parties, and a wrapper which is the logic of how that token can be used. So effectively, the issuers are sort of giving their tokens out into the real world and saying, okay, app, you deal with it as the user sees fit. But the wrapper gives that logic. So if I don't want it to be used this way, or I want it to be used this way, that's in the wrapper. And that the app will interrogate the wrapper in order to know how should I interact with relying parties. That was
very good.
a slight
Paying attention
correction.
to the chat.
It is.
Great. So that's what we sort of came up with, and it's at a conceptual stage. I mean, you can do an awful lot on top of that basic, but we're saying, what do we need to do at the centre to make this work? And then hopefully the market will do its thing. It'll find the pricing. It'll figure out how the relying parties want to operate their logic in choosing between tokens. But we hopefully tick the box for the AEPD because it's an on-device solution. We tick the box for CNIL because it's a double-blind solution. But it's an open system, so you can have competitive pricing and you choose between different providers. So we're really interested in people's reactions. But let's start with any sort of questions around understanding to start with.
I just have a question about the, you were just talking with the pricing about how there could be, different pricing. How would one user end up with two different tokens?
Yeah, so on Tuesday, let's say it's on Monday, I go to Pornhub and they refer me to Alistair and I get my age check token because Alistair's done a deal with Pornhub, sure. And I can use that token. On the day after, I go to Xhamster, yeah. And they've not done a deal with Alistair. They would much prefer to use Yoti. Yeah. So they actually say to their users, would you like to do a new age check? Because we can't see a Yoti token in your app, your agent. We can only see an age check token, and we'd rather not use that. So would you mind doing a new age check? And then the user will do a new age check for whichever is the preferred provider for that new thing.
Oh, I see. So it's not Yoti that would choose to do their own age check versus using this to go to age check.
So you could wake up one morning and think, I really want to get a token. And you could shop around and you could choose any provider you like, get a token, download the app onto your device, and you're ready to go. And any relying party can use that for $1. And that you're into the default world, so you're up and running. But typically, we think most people will probably start by perhaps at 13 wanting to open a TikTok account, and TikTok will have 2 or 3 providers, maybe with multiple different methods, and you'll choose the one you want to do. But then you might want to open, I don't know, Twitter feed or something, and they may be using different providers. So you could accumulate tokens. The tokens won't last forever. While we don't get any younger, we think to keep the integrity of the age verification system, it's a good idea to ask people at least, say, at worst once a year, to renew their age verification. So if there is any error in the system, any fraud, which we haven't picked up on, hopefully we will pick up on it, and then that gets excluded within a year. For higher risk applications, buying a knife online, you might have the token only last an hour or 24 hours. I mean, these are conversations to have with regulators. Anything to add to that, Alistair?
Yeah, so the actual standard of the token is not, the technology that we're explaining doesn't dictate what the standard of the tokens are, and that's a conversation that we're starting now and getting input on.
So
Adrian.
For the porn site operator, I think you were saying before, if they haven't selected an identity provider, they could still use the system. How does that work? Do they contract directly with the app or the scheme itself effectively?
You're looking at me, it was your idea about that particular use of the token. In order for a relying party to get access to the app, they have to have been introduced to it by a issuer. The issuer gives them the access to load to interrogate the app, to load the app onto their site. So in sort of the models that I've been thinking about, there's always a contracted issuer that's always present. As I say, these conversations are new, and the technologies doesn't dictate the sort of commercial relations we can have. So this is a conversation that we're having between each other as well.
There's a question online. Hi, Jen. Jen Person's asked, I'd like to hear more about the cost aspect. If the user is charged, then children will only use the free one. What are the free companies or options, common business models? I would imagine that quite a lot of the social media companies will bear the cost of doing the age verification when that's a regulatory requirement. So there will be no charge to the user. You would generally expect the relying party to pay for the cost of this. Obviously, in the long term, that's paid for by customers one way or another, but it'll be coming out of advertising revenue or however those social media companies make their money, and the same for all the other platforms. So I wouldn't expect any users to necessarily pay to be part of this scheme. No, I mean, there's, as far as I'm aware, any of the providers, the issuers that have been providing online solutions, all effectively gain their revenue from the relying parties. There are some models that have come from the offline world where there are sort of existing cards to prove your age, where the user is paying for those cards and they are becoming digital. I think they're looking at that particular model and seeing whether that would work. But the vast majority will be free to the user. Absolutely, there'll be lots of choice. Yeah.
If the user is under 18, would you renew the age verification and create a new token like more frequently? For example, to know when they reach the age of consent or when they reach adulthood.
I'm just going to repeat the question for Pete because the microphone won't pick you up. Yeah. So the question was, if the users are under 18, would we do age verifications more often, particularly to account for what you might call aging up? So people were not 18 and then they have become 18. Can I have a go at that?
Yeah, sure. So the actual the way that the token can be used, one that we're envisaging, is that there's a sort of intelligence within it. So you can interrogate, the relying party can ask a question, are they this age? The next day they can ask, are they this age? And the answer will be right all the time. So the token will have a sort of an awareness that you're getting older. The relying party only gets the kernel with a sort of yes or no, and it's signed. So they get the right answer signed, but they don't have any age element other than it is yes or no to the question you asked.
So it kind of gets updated as
yes.
child.
And if the level, so the token might say, I'm a level of assurance 1, and this person, when we verified them, was 12. You might say, I wanted a level of assurance 2, and they've got to be 12. So, okay, not good enough level of assurance, do another check. If the app finds the token that meets all your requirements, you can then get a thumbs up.
So does that mean that any provider or the originating issuer, if, say for example, their model already just provides that attribute of over 18, over 25, will they potentially have to change the way that they report things to make sure that data, the actual age data of their attribute, is stored within the app to give it that context?
Not necessarily. They might choose to, but not necessarily. If you can answer the question, then you'll get your sort of kernel can go back with a yes or no. So if you don't need to do that if you're just looking to do, are you an adult, yes or no? Because once you're an adult, you're always an adult.
So we would expect the relying parties to apply the principle of data minimization and only ask what they need to ask. So in some cases, they just need an over or under reply. In other cases, they're actually wanting to check the actual date of birth, which they can do, provided they've got a legal justification for needing to know to the exact date how old you are.
That will that will then flow through into what's actually stored in the app.
Correct.
And those tokens effectively almost have a different level of verification associated with them, a different standard maybe. Is that the idea?
I mean, see, the level of assurance
Yeah.
is sort of independent of what you're proving. So I might have worked out your age date using a very soggy copy of your passport, which you held up to the screen, which would be still one date, but it wouldn't be as good as if I'd read the chip using your phone, and which would obviously deliver a higher level of assurance for that particular age attribute. So the process of audit and certification will look at all your methods and allocate them a level of assurance so that everybody else knows that even if you've, as we just heard earlier today, echocardiogram estimates of age, we hadn't thought of that 2 years ago, but we would now line it up against the levels of assurance and figure out, at what level can we put it. And this data would help us now a lot with, what the different algorithms allow us to assume in terms of their accuracy as well. Any other questions? We did also want to have a sort of a conversation a little bit about the liability issues of this, because in any sort of interoperability, and we didn't deal with this in phase one, there is a problem, I suppose, of what happens if it goes wrong. So if I'm an age verification provider, but and I'm contracted to a particular site, but then I have allowed the user to use a token from a different provider who does not have a contract directly with this particular site, and it's wrong, and that site gets sued by an angry mother or taken to court by an attorney general in the US, how are we going to deal with that? And Danny's here. He's our a lawyer on the team from the Netherlands, and I don't know if you want to pick up on that and ask a few questions and see if anybody's willing to give us some answers.
Yeah, because indeed, we were very much wondering, when I'm watching, if I'm seeing this system and all those parties that are operating here, I'm immediately thinking how are all the different legal arrangements, and I think for now it would be very interesting to learn how do you deal with this right now, how as an age assurance provider. How do you currently deal with liabilities, and what if something goes wrong? How are you going to handle these kind of cases, and what do you do, for example, if someone else relies on your token and it goes wrong? What currently actually happens? Those were
So yeah, I don't know if you're willing to tell.
Yeah, happy to. Yeah.
When somebody does contracts with you,
Yeah.
how
So
much liability do you currently take in that one-to-one contract?
well, obviously as little as possible. But effectively, what we're doing when most of our contracts, I think it's not just us, it's common across the industry. You can attest to reliably match against databases to do a verification. You can't attest to the accuracy of the database. So you can do all your you can say that you're doing all the due diligence, and you've got to use reputable sources, etc., etc. So you can't just use a list that you found on the street. So there is a duty of care, but as a provider, I can't vouch that the data. So in the UK, we're using the three CRAs in the UK, so we use all three. I can't vouch that every single bit of data in there is accurate.
Yeah.
So my contracts with my clients is, look, I will, I'll warranty what I'm doing in terms of giving you that information from my source files, but I can't be held responsible for what's in those source files.
And are there any are there cases known that at some point one of your clients is actually being receiving complaints or being sued over providing a certain age check, and it turned out that it was wrong, or what happened?
Never happened to me yet. Which is plastic. I'm not aware of that because the contracts are really around sort of doing the best possible to ensure that you're giving the right information. I am aware that sometimes you have the wrong information in data houses. And as under GDPR, you do have the right as a data subject to actually phone them up and say, this, you've got the wrong information on me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we do millions of checks, and we have seen that when something was inaccurate on the data.
So what you're promising your clients is, we check age in the following ways.
Yeah.
We will check age that way.
Yeah.
And we will use these data sources.
Yeah.
But if the data we get is wrong.
Yeah.
But we've done everything we said we would do, not MeGov, go and talk to Experian or TransUnion or the Passport Office or whoever allowed erroneous data to get out there.
Yeah, and it's, I think it's, we're very transparent with our relying parties as to how we're doing our methodology. And I think we need to have, personally, I think you'd need to have that sort of transparency within the token to explain how you created it, because it's out there now, and somebody needs to be able to go, okay, how was this done? And if there is an issue, how do I undo if there's any damage?
Yeah, I mean, John, Adrian, are other providers taking a similar attitude to liability at the moment?
We're kind of starting from a don't change what's already existing. So
Because I know that when your boss Paula was speaking in the House of Commons the other day, a few weeks back now, there was some challenge about, well, it's very easy to get a fake bank account. You can use false credentials to open a bank account. So surely your whole system, you must be liable for that. But presumably you're saying if the bank has the wrong data, that you wouldn't be liable for that.
So if we're talking to a line party, they're onboarding customers, however they do it today, we're not looking to change that risk model for them, unless we're specifically trying to say it's a fraud product and trying to fix something. So if we're just giving you the data source, we might be replacing a form filling process, but you just get the data, you don't get any additional insurance or liability compensation for something that goes wrong.
Yeah.
If you want to have that commercial discussion around offsetting some of your risk, we need to look at, okay, what's the increased risk we're trying to offset? Do we need to take any insurance to cover that risk? And it's a commercial conversation, but the basic product is data only.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it is that's a fraud product, that's a fraud solution.
This is the microphone, which is why I have to do this dance.
Sorry, I was just agreeing that that is getting in the realms of anti-fraud, which is something that is probably a little bit out of scope.
Yeah. I wondered, not want to put people on the spot, so you can say you don't want to say, but obviously in the very litigious world of America, John, do you get away with saying that your liability is limited to doing the job, but you're only as good as the data sources you use?
Yeah, and in the US, I think you also want the additional protection of an indemnity or hold harmless with respect to the data. We try to make it very clear to the end users that, while we do everything possible to use trusted and verified data sources, that no data source is perfect. And if there's information in a data source that we access that is incorrect, there's the possibility that they'll be the recipient of the verification based on that. And so what we say is we want you to indemnify and hold us harmless against any all claims that arise out of the use of this data or information that we provide you. It definitely elevates the discussion so that our expectations are managed. Many times these contracts go in a drawer and they never come out again until it's unlike the event of a water landing. You know what I mean? Yeah. People don't look at them every day. So we try to do our best to not only put it in the contracts, but elevate it in conversation when we onboard a new customer, that we're managing their expectations about this famous no silver bullet thing, and that the data is, while we trust it, and it's a verified source, it's not scraped data from the internet, that there's a possibility that you get a bad record.
Yeah, and we had a conversation as well while we've been here about some of the requirements in the US now not to keep any personal data when you've done an age check, which is a standard clause in a lot of the state legislation. But that made you quite jumpy because you'd like to have something to be able to defend yourself.
I think all of the providers who use trusted and verified data sources to generate a thumb up or thumb down for an end user based on whatever rule set you apply, you want to be able to defend a position you take at the end. We've traditionally kept only a footprint. We call it the transaction, okay? Date and time stamp, the reference number, a transaction ID, the results of a transaction, all that kind of thing. So you want to be able to hold that. We had long ago an incident where a client said, "Oh yeah, I use Veridat," and they were getting tagged for not having verified, and so I very ably successful to share with a regulator that, look, even though I give them back a response, doesn't mean I have to use it. They can ignore my response and just go sell something anyway, or they can get a response from me that that has good information in it, but I can't track it back to something I actually did for that person. So I prefer if we could keep just the first name and the last name and the transaction ID and the rest. Don't keep any real sense. Don't keep the address. Don't keep the phone. Don't keep the social. Don't keep all those other elements of a transaction. Try to do your best to minimize what you keep, and then do a good job protecting it, and just get a minimum defendable position in the event that there's an issue with a transaction and a parent who's upset about it, that we have a way to go back in and look at that. I think one of the challenges that we see is sometimes the use of scores, where the data providers use a score and just come up with an amalgamated idea of a yes or a no, without necessarily knowing why they would have failed or not failed, and going back and fixing that. Anyway, it's the longest way to answer a question. I do that all the time. Sorry.
Actually, I was thinking about the concern you had, and it made me realize, of course, we wouldn't just be doing an age check purely to comply with perhaps a pornography requirement. We, at the same time, are probably using the age check to comply with COPPA, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act,
Sure.
where you probably do want to keep an audit trail to prove that you've complied with COPPA. But on the other hand, the law on porn is saying thou shalt not keep an audit trail. So I think that's a bit of a conundrum.
It is, which I shared with you yesterday. So hopefully you have a magic wand that can just fix that.
Exactly. So I mean, this is a bit of a divergent. I think it derives from a conversation about liability, but that's one-to-one liability. So the question is then, when we're working with this system, how do we handle liability then?
Yeah, like is it like what I'm thinking of, like the parallels I see is more like if you for example have the GDPR, then you of course have like the controller who holds all the responsibilities to make sure that everything is in line with the GDPR. I assume everyone is relatively aware of like what's in there, and then you have the processor role, and here you could perhaps say like, okay, the relying party is actually like that is the one that has to comply with all the like regulations, and then you have like the issuer that is actually doing it on behalf of the relying party. And if the issuer is like relying on another issuer, then perhaps like you have the sub processor role, and if you're transparent upfront, like how you're doing these checks, and you're saying like, okay, I agree with this methodology and I agree that this provides this level of assurance, then you can actually kind of like resell it or like reuse it in the same way. But like what Ian indeed said, like it's now trying to minimize your liabilities as much as possible is like logical, and it's also on one-on-one, like if you're talking with your client directly. But if you have to transpose it to an interoperable system, are things going to change? Like do you see things differently, like having the knowledge of how your technology works, or assessing how the technology of your competitors or like the other verification providers work? Does it change anything? Like,
it might be useful to think about the parallels here with self-sovereign identity, because your architecture is very similar to self-sovereign identity.
How do they handle it?
Well, my view of how they handle it is that it's all on the relying party, but the way they do it is you have issuers issue credentials into wallets, and then the issuer is listed on a register or something, and then the verifier, the relying party, can verify cryptographically that this thing has actually come from a known source from the issuer, and then they can look up the issuer and go, well, do I trust them or not? So it's the verifier that makes a determination. So the conversation you're having about giving some transparency about the exact process that was followed helps you to push that decision, helps to enable the relying party to make a more, informed decision, which means they can then take more responsibility for it.
Yeah.
I think if it's all a bit opaque, then it becomes
So
difficult.
the good thing about this system is the relying party can know the issuer, can't they? So we don't disguise who the issuer is. So they know who they could go after. But of course, liability tends to go with a contract. And at the moment, if you're perhaps using our default dollar option, you probably don't have a contract with the person who's providing it. So we may need at the centre to sort of have a general contract that people who are wanting to participate have to sign, which essentially creates that liability between the issuer, limited liability between the issuer and the relying
I
party.
think that as a general point, though, if you're looking at
Get my steps in.
As a general point, though, if you're looking at trying to create the conditions for the market to evolve, to grow quickly, then taking down barriers is the thing that needs to happen here. And so I think it's usually the case that providers are not keen to take on liability, right? And so I think it's beneficial to think of situations where you can set it up so that actually relying parties can make informed choices, because that's going to help the market to emerge quicker.
Yes, I mean, so my instinct for the pilot is that we have a limited liability arrangement, which effectively emulates what Alistair's company already does and what everybody else does. Yeah.
I have a question for you. So in this model, is there any parallel from your point of view to the payment schemes like MasterCard or Visa or what? Sorry.
I was getting there.
Yeah,
Good comment.
Yeah.
Well, no, only because I feel like the diagram is very reminiscent of my view of how all of that works. And what those associations have done is just create rails for payments. And there's an association agreement, there's someone in the middle, there's an issuer, there's an acquirer, yeah, and it's very similar. So from your point of view, is that?
Yeah, well, let's ask the two people who created the scheme who both came from the payments industry.
Oh, well,
Because there might be a clue.
So the sort of Visa MasterCard model was very much in mind, especially when it got to scale, because the complexity of bilateral arrangements would just get too hard to deal with. So yes, is the short answer.
And it's also the case, I believe, that the schemes will never tell you this, right? But in general, the liability flows to the merchant, and it's only when there's a liability shift in place, because they put some new standard in and say, like, you've got to have a chip card rather than a magstripe card or something. That and to encourage adoption, they put the liability shift in place, which means that then issuers have an incentive to put those cards out. But in general, and a merchant is the equivalent of a relying party in your model there, right?
So we're probably not going to fully solve liability today, but any last thoughts on liability?
Yeah,
we've got a separate question now.
Yeah, what I was also thinking, I also thought of the parallel with the EV charging system, where you actually see the same, that you park your car, electric vehicles, that you park your car and you can charge. At least that's how it works in the Netherlands, and it's kind of like being adopted by other countries as well, that you can use any card at any charging station, and there you have kind of like the same role. You have in the Netherlands a governing body that actually sets the standards and also says like some minimum legal requirements that you have to put into the contracts if you're making like an interoperable system. And so perhaps like that is also, I think, an interesting one to take a look at, to see how they did it, and actually to also, as EU consent, take a proactive approach in trying to like create all the different legal relations between the parties, and make sure that there's a certain level of trust and fairness between the different operators.
So we've got 6 months left for phase 2, and part of that is going to be figuring out liability, or at least enough to get us up and running. You can see, is it on liability or is it on something else?
It's on it's minimum levels of insurance.
Let's do this one. So we've got a question from Jen online again. To store a token, does a browser respond in the same way as cookies, and therefore do browser settings that default to reject cookies also reject tokens?
The simple answer to that question is we don't use cookies at all.
Right, so it's not a cookie. So I guess the question maybe from Jen, I'm guessing what might be behind it, Jen, and I think you can probably speak if you want to. But is if I'm a sort of person who doesn't want to be tracked and I don't trust this system and I don't want these tokens, can I just avoid having them?
You could avoid having the tokens, but there is no ability for the app to track what you're doing.
Yeah.
The app doesn't know who the relying party is.
Yeah. But Jen rather wisely doesn't trust.
Yes.
Doesn't trust much.
I might not want my device to be known to be a device which has already got the token on it, as an example, I suppose.
Anyway, thanks and helpful. So that's really. So we'll take that as a win. By all means, do you want to?
I had a question on, will there be minimum levels of assurance for those originating issuers to sort of build trust in that EU consent? Because obviously not all forms of assurance are equal. You know, if you're not requiring a liveness check or whatever, then it's easier for someone to spoof it, and would that erode trust in the...
Yeah, so we're trying to get to a world, this is beyond this project, we're trying to get to a world where regulators look at each of the use cases, decide the proportionate level of assurance that's required, choose from a finite list of levels, which is contemplated in the IEEE standard, but is being hammered out in the ISO here. And then so you can have basic, enhanced, strict, or standard, and you take your pick, but it's one of those four. And then all the tokens would indicate which of those you're on. And it's not just false positive rates, it's what's the distribution of the error, how often do you authenticate, how good are your anti-spoofing measures, how good is your liveness test. So there's a whole blend of minimum standards to achieve a given level of assurance. And obviously if you fail on any one of them, then you drop down to the level below. Any other sort of general questions about this bright idea that we have been dreaming up? So, I mean, we would also be a data protection. We'd have to have a data protection impact assessment. There's a recent European finding from the advertising world that basically, even though the blue never touches any personal data, it's still accountable for compliance on data protection.
Is this largely aimed at just these specific potential use cases that you found in Spain or you found in some of these other countries that want a double blind? Is that generating the most focus for you on this approach?
No, I think one of the drawbacks of the
porn industry, like you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean one of the drawbacks of the Spanish solution is they've really designed it with only adult content in mind. Right. So we were asking them when they presented here yesterday, well, what about the minimum age of the data sharing in Spain, which I think is 14, I got it wrong, but I think it's 14. Because you might want to ask, is this person old enough to give consent to share their data, or do I need parental consent, similar to copper? Yeah. And they would go, oh, well, maybe we need to do something for 14 as well, but that would just be a 14 plus. But then we also have an age-appropriate design code in the UK that says you have to treat a 5-year-old differently from a 10-year-old, differently from a 15-year-old when they're on a potentially harmful site. So actually, that use case is very real, and Europe is going to adopt a similar code. The Californians have passed legislation which was stopped, and a couple of other states have done so as well. So there's going to be almost any age you can think of may need to be checked at some point.
That means the optimization that you're doing in that step between the token and the line party. Because I think what I'm seeing with my customers, not necessarily with, because we're not doing business with the adult industry, but we're doing more business with online e-commerce and other gaming and other kinds of things, that most of the customers are now indicating to us they want the identity with the age. They don't just want an age. You know, they want to be able to marry a carbon person on the other end of a not present transaction with some information they can rely on, so that they've got a...
Yeah, so we had a conversation as a trade association. Do we want to rename ourselves the Age and Identity Providers Association? Because I'm quite entrepreneurial, I want as many members as possible.
Of course.
But we decided we would rise above identity. We want to remain pure and just focus on age. But I think if you look at this system, it can work for identity as well, if you want it to. Obviously, the anonymization piece, you're not necessarily anonymizing, but any other attributes you could send anonymously. But equally, you probably would want to be sending the first and last names if it's a identity service. But you could do that, can't you?
Yeah, no, I'm just saying you can run more than one scheme on it. So I think the sensible next step for this sort of POC or phase 2 is to focus on the anonymous only. But you're quite right, in e-commerce, it's the merchant actually knows your name already.
Yeah.
So what's the big thing? And sometimes you want to make sure it is the same person doing the AV.
That's what he's verifying. Sure.
Exactly. So that's a model that we'd need to discuss and work out. Okay, how does that fit in? And how do we want to incorporate that into the scheme?
It's probably a parallel service, just because from a PR perspective, trying to explain to people that this if you use the system this way, it's entirely anonymous, but if you use the system that way, it'll reveal exactly who you are. I think people are going to struggle to trust that they haven't crossed the streams, as it were. So we'll have to think of a new name for that.
Did you hear Yogi's presentation of something similar to this with tokens?
I didn't see that.
Yes, but that was so.
How was that different? I mean,
Yeah, no. So it's kind of the Yoti conversation. The PKI handshake has it's sort of, I would say, compatible, and it's a part of how you create the tokens and how you provide tokens to the relying party. So it very much is aligned to sort of the speaking for all of Yoti now, but we did have a good chat about this. They can see how that system works with this as well.
Yeah, Adrian.
Is the token bound to the device? So if a dad has used the device, can the kid get the token and share it with all the school friends? Kind of scenario.
Ben, you can give me a sort of. Do you want to take that one?
So it is bound to the device, but it also requires a level of authentication to gain access to allow a token to be transferred.
Yeah, and you can't pick up a token and then give it to another device.
Yeah. And for devices, say shared family iPad.
Yeah.
Does it know who's logged into the iPad?
Yes, so I mean, one of the sort of key things, even from the sort of Digital Economy Act days, was that you need to go with shared devices and private devices. So this allows for more than one individual to have an account on an app without crossing the stream, so to speak.
And this also is really helpful for people who use incognito mode all the time. Because existing methods where you might have done an age check with that company, you've got one of an age checked cookie. That doesn't work for you if you'd have to redo an age check every single time in the current system. We've just got a couple of minutes left, and anybody got any thoughts? I mean, if you were from an age verification provider, would you like to get on board with this? Is this something you could see being a helpful way for the industry to go forward and meet some of these regulatory requirements?
So how does it fit in with the world of verifiable credentials? And is this a feature that can be in a wallet?
Yes, and as I say, the sort of which standards get adopted for how we for the token creation is still it's a discussion that's only just started. But I'm very sure we'll be incorporating the existing standards rather than trying to do anything new ourselves. That's more your.
Rumours that this diagram was drawn last week are wildly untrue. Yes, Emil.
What difference do you make between the agent and app you were mentioning? Is it like something that you download?
So
agent versus app is the question.
Yeah, so the reason, if you call it an app, people think, I've got to download it, and that's going to slow things down, and that's going to be a pain, and not everyone's going to do it. In this proposal, it's a progressive web app, so it's something that can just be loaded into a web session. But the technology doesn't just have to be that. So it could be an app if you want to actually have, this is a really quick way of doing it, and actually I can verify myself on the phone, so it's not even on my device, and you can do lots of clever stuff. So we're calling it an agent. I think the word app is somewhere in there, but really agent's a little better, more accurate.
So following up on that one, how do you link it to the device then?
How do you link
the system to the device?
So when the relying when I'm going onto a website, the relying party will load the app agent onto the device. They have the capability to do that because myself as a sort of issuer that's contracted with them, or OneID, or whoever it is that's contracted, has given them access to the keys to allow that loading onto a user's device.
So the user would have to trust Pornhub or anyone on the website.
The user would have to trust AgeAware.
They could get the app from us directly, from
Okay.
AgeAware. They could get it from an age verification provider, or they could get it from a reliant party. I mean, anybody can give you an app.
So-
can't
Yeah.
they?
So you're specifying how the app stores the token and how that gets bound to the device.
Yes. Well, actually, I should say, to be clear, it's this organisation that's doing this.
That's what I mean.
Yeah,
that's
so,
what I mean.
and the idea is the whole thing is contestable. Others can come into this market unless, except for the blue bit, which is the bit that, you know, writes the rules. But you can come, obviously to start with, we'll probably have to create the app and we'll have to create the commercial scheme. But once it's up and running and people are used to it, then others can come in and have a go.
I mean, I'm assuming that probably you'll do something like, take advantage of the key stores and key chains and things that are available on commercial devices and say, this is what you need to use to get an acceptable token within the device, within the app. Something along those
Again,
lines.
that's something that could be specified in terms of how the committee and how everybody feels that it needs to be implemented. So in a sense, it's quite agnostic in terms of the implementation.
It's deliberately not determined yet. It was done last week, this diagram, so it is new, it is hot off the press. The actual, the conversations that need to happen around the standards of that token need to be happen with the whole community, and the technology itself is completely agnostic.
Well, but to Adrian's point, when he asked, can the token be taken from one device to another, that's not just a function of
No, that's
the
true.
interface into the app to receive the token and give it out. It's
Correct.
What the app does.
Correct.
Inside. Yeah.
Correct, no, that's true.
And so what type of technology, what options do you have?
So we're going to have to draw a close because I'm getting evil
Yes.
looks through the window. I know certainly Alistair's around for much of the rest of the week, so grab me in the bar.
Yeah.
Grab me in the bar, but
That's where
just for
he'll
a
be.
drink, because I don't do tech, yeah. Thank you all very much.
I am Steve, that's the
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I wasn't sure where you were from, so nice to meet you properly, Regulator, we actually invited Keneal Satin on our meeting yesterday when we were, I would have invited you if I didn't remember, when we were discussing with all the other age verification providers, because that was the first time they said that we wanted, I think the error that I would say Keneal and AEPD made is that they didn't engage with us, and they created these laboratory experiments, which when you say, how's that going to work in the wild, it started to crumble, you know, so you're much better off, so let's get together in a room and figure it out between us, and then suppliers say things like, sorry, how are we supposed to get paid for that? Well, look, we